So we knew we are not going to be strong in 2023 and even the start of 2024. We knew that what we had in the pipeline was going to be good. We had the right results in the wind tunnel, but we had to get that to the car. And it was, in fact, the upgrade we brought to Miami and Lando won. That was a real milestone turning point in the team.
Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we're joined by Joel Vermiglio from McLaren F1. Obviously, Formula One is the holy grail, the absolute pinnacle of motorsport, and it's kind of shrouded in a lot of secrecy because with NDAs and just generally the secretive nature of Formula One, it's difficult for us as mere mortals to really find out much in the way of detail. Fortunately, we're here with Joel to find out a little bit about what goes on behind that secret shroud. Now, one of the questions that we and Joel quite often get asked is, what is the path to get into Formula One? It's obviously quite difficult and it's incredibly competitive with hundreds if not thousands of graduates striving for just a handful of jobs. Well, we find out what Joel's personal road into Formula One was and find out that maybe you don't actually need to be a rocket scientist with a PhD in order to find yourself working in Formula One. Interestingly though, Joel actually came across our radar because he's also an HPA member, using our tuning courses particularly in order to help tune a somewhat radical car that he and his brother are building, and we'll find out more details as we get into our interview. Before we jump into our chat, for those who are new to the Tuned In podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to build performance engines, how to tune EFI, how to construct wiring harnesses. We also cover topics on fabrication, 3D modeling and CAD, race driver education, and data logging, just to name a few. You can find all of our courses at hpacademy.com/courses. All of these courses are delivered in high definition video modules that you can watch from anywhere in the world, provided you've got an internet connection. This means you can learn from the comfort of your own place and you can learn at your own pace. All of our courses also come with a 60-day no questions asked money back guarantee. So if you purchase them for any reason at all, decide it wasn't quite what you expected, no problem, let us know. We'll give you a full refund. And for podcast listeners, you can also use the coupon code podcast75. That will get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. We'll put the coupon code in the show notes to make it nice and easy for you to find. Lastly, if you like free stuff, then I've got a great deal for you. We are constantly partnering with some of the biggest names in the aftermarket performance industry to give away some great prizes. You can always find our latest prize at hpacademy.com/giveaway. It might be an aftermarket ECU or dash. It could be some engine components or engine building tools, or just about anything in between. They are great prizes and we will ship them free of charge to your door if you're the winner. There's no tricks here, no purchase required to get your name into the draw. All right, enough with our introduction. Let's get into our interview now. All right, welcome to the podcast, Joel. Thanks for joining us today. Definitely excited for this one. Not often we get to sit down with someone that is currently working in Formula One. Before we get into what you're doing at the moment, though, let's rewind a little bit and learn about your background. So I understand from chatting to you before we started recording, your first passion actually wasn't cars, which is kind of unusual for an HPA guest. So take us back to the early days and what was your passion growing up?
Yeah, thanks, Andre. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so growing up, computers was really my passion as a kid. I was a really geeky kid growing up. My dad used to work for Texas Instruments, so a big electronics company, so I was quite sort of familiar with computers and electronics. So as I grew up, I was really sort of surrounded by PCs, PC components. Yeah, I remember sort of sitting on his lap helping to change processors in an old desktop PC, and we're talking sort of the early mid-90s here, so it's Pentium 486, etc. It was old school stuff now, but pretty exciting technology back then. So that ended up being my passion, really, and even from a young age, I was set on getting involved in computers. I wanted to write software and design video games. When I started playing games and things as well. So that was how I sort of saw my life going as a kid, and then even into school.
And what sort of age were you at that point playing around with these computers?
I was 6-7 years old.
Okay, yeah. Most people at that age probably still want to be a fireman, but I get it. Things develop.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I started playing video games and upgrading the PC so I could play better games, and with my dad's sort of computer knowledge and stuff as well. That was really the path I was going down right through school. Even I had my university course planned out when I was in high school, and kind of knew what I wanted to go and do. And cars wasn't my goal.
Okay, so at some point, obviously things did change. So how and when did sort of cars come on the scene?
Essentially, in high school, I had this plan to go and do this computer science course at university, and I ended up not getting the grades needed. I got okay grades, average-ish, but just unfortunately not quite what I needed to go and do this university course. So I left school and I went to college to study for the grades I needed to do the courses, the maths and physics that I needed to get onto this course. And unfortunately, that sort of coincided with passing my driving test and sort of discovering sort of world outside of school, really, I suppose, and girls and driving around and just finding like
all of the freedom that a car provides.
Exactly, yeah. So I had my independence, and I started sort of dropping out of college. Even I started skipping lectures and going around my friend's house and taking the air filter out of his 1 litre Ford Fiesta because it sounded great when that out of it, and what we considered modifying cars really when we didn't really know anything about it. So when I then dropped out, I no longer had that computer science avenue available to me, and I ended up working for my dad's business. He'd started a business in the electronics and electrical industry, primarily sort of domestic electrical installations really, and I just started working for him and spending all my free time and money tinkering on my car. I had a 1990 Nissan Micra as my first car, so that had the aftermarket wheels on it and K&N air filter and a few bits and pieces that I thought was the height of car modification.
I can imagine trying to extract much more power out of a Nissan Micra would be challenging. I'm interested, just sort of a little off topic, but you're based in the UK. I'm interested that you gravitated towards a Japanese car rather than something sort of European, which is sort of the norm. You see the Volkswagen Golfs, BMWs, etc. sort of were and are popular for modification in the UK and Europe.
Well, I think my dad was very he was technical with electronics and things, but he was also quite mechanically minded. So we always fixed our own cars, and we would try and avoid paying a garage to do work on a car if we could do it ourselves. So I grew up with that sort of mentality, and it was really the choice of the Nissan Micra was really just, it was price driven. It was actually a crash damaged car that I got that I could afford, and then with my dad's help we repaired it. It was mostly superficial bodywork damage, but it didn't take much to make one of those cars essentially worthless. It wasn't worth a lot in the first place, so I was able to pick it up very cheaply. But yeah, I mean, I grew up in the sort of time of sort of the Citroen Saxo and the Peugeot and the Peugeot 106, and I had the Nissan Micra, which was never even really considered by by many. But I loved it. It was a great first car, and I learned a lot playing with it, and it was really sort of the change of trajectory for me from a sort of computer and electronics-based career.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I am, as we'll get into later, though, with what you're currently doing, there's obviously a lot of synergy between the car side of your life and your earlier sort of electronics and computer systems. So yeah, I guess it has all sort of come together to shape your career.
Yeah, it's sort of come full circle in a way, and it's quite nice that I've ended up combining sort of that electronics and there's a lot of computer software and systems that I'm involved with, and cars and motorsport. So yeah, it's quite nice to combine both worlds really.
Okay. Let's sort of talk about the direction your career took from there, or your education, I should say, really took from this point. Computer systems is no longer maybe viable. It's no longer your option. You're now interested in cars. And, I would assume that generally, if you want to get involved in F1 at almost any level, you're probably going to need to have a degree that's relevant. And my first guess before talking to you was probably the traditional sort of mechanical engineering or electronic engineering degrees. What actually happened?
Yeah, for the most part, I think you're right. That's the typical avenue. For me, I started discovering cars and had some cash, and I started spending my money improving my car, and I started tinkering with a classic Mini. I restored an old Mini, and I took it to some sprint and hill climb events at weekends, and I just got chatting to a guy there who sort of saw the car and was like, "Look, you've done such a great job with this. I assume you work in motorsport, you're involved in cars." I said, "No, it's just a hobby." And he said, "Well, have you thought about maybe making it a career and working in it?" And I hadn't really. I never even thought it would be something I could do. I just was like, okay, this is I'm working for my dad now, and I'll take over his business at some point, and I'll just play with cars at the weekend and the evenings. And this guy said, "Look, there's this college course that you can do. It's a foundation degree. It's 2 years, and you can study at this college that's quite nearby. So maybe you should give it a go." I'll think about it. And I sort of went away, looked up the course. I thought, well, actually, this sounds pretty cool. It's a short course, but it's quite hands-on. They had quite a nice little workshop there. I actually did have the sort of qualifications, and the car itself was sort of vocational experience as well that they would accept. This Mini that I'd restored. So I applied for it, and very fortunate to get a space on it. And it all happened very quickly, really. I went from working for my dad to sort of just playing with cars at the weekend, and suddenly I was like, "Oh, sorry, Dad, I'm going to leave and go and study this course full time." So
okay, that's in itself quite a difficult decision to make. Coming from employment, your regular paycheck, and then taking this gamble on a 2-year degree. You haven't actually mentioned the name of that degree. So what was this course called?
So it was a foundation degree in motorsport engineering.
Okay.
So it's offered by Oxford Brookes in the UK, and fortunately you can study this foundation degree at various sort of satellite colleges around the country. So I wasn't very near Oxford to go to Oxford Brookes for this. I was near one of these satellite colleges, so I was able to mostly live at home. I mean, I did sort of residential for a couple of nights a week when it helped with the late nights on the course. But it's a very sort of broad introduction to engineering and motorsport. It's predominantly mechanical engineering, I suppose, really, but with a focus and emphasis on motorsport. So there's a course in data analysis, a course in composite materials. You actually do some practical fabrication of parts. There's a course in engine building, and it's quite a practical course rather than like being a heavily academic course like the majority of sort of mechanical engineering degrees might be.
Okay. As you're sort of going through this course, what are you sort of thinking now is your direction for the future? I mean, are you already thinking, well, F1, obviously that's the go, that's where I'm headed? And I mean, I guess for a lot of us, a job in F1 is probably the holy grail, or were you not looking that far ahead?
I'd say absolutely not F1, to be honest. I mean, if I'm totally honest, I wasn't even the biggest F1 fan. I would watch it, but I wouldn't religiously watch it. If it was on, yes, I'd love to see it, but it became a little bit tricky to watch here in the UK with basically different companies having different rights. And if you don't have the TV package, then you can't watch it, or you've got to pay to view it. And so you'd catch highlights every now and then. So
try being on the other side of the world where you have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
You're not getting a lot of sympathy for me. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, that's much worse. So I wasn't looking at F1 at all. I just wanted to work in motorsport, really, and even just getting involved in club level stuff was I was never looking that far in the future. And they sort of do this thing, when you start a course, it's a bit of an icebreaker, but they sort of sit everyone down on the course and say, "Look, where do you see yourself in 5 years?" And really, all I could say was, "I'd just like to have a job in motorsport in some capacity."
Just that question, I think, is actually more powerful and revealing than a lot of people would think. And I mean, I get it when when I was much, much younger, I wasn't looking much further than what I was having for dinner that night. Planning 5 years into my future was just unheard of. But yeah, I think the story is if you're not aiming for anything, you'll hit it every time. And sort of the gist of that is it's really important to try and look into the future and sort of formulate a bit of a direction and a plan. Like what do I want to be doing in 5 years? Because if you have that little seed planted in your mind's very powerful and kind of finding ways to get you to that goal. So yeah, interesting question that I think a lot of people should actually be asking themselves pretty regularly. Now, coming back to the sort of a career in motorsport, I think probably Formula One might be the exception to the norm, but maybe you're going to tell me I'm completely wrong here. It's an industry where there's a lot of competition for jobs, and particularly at the sort of grassroots and sort of semi-professional level, there's probably not a lot of money in it. How hard is it to sort of find a position where you can actually make enough money for this to be a realistic sort of vocational career path?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is so competitive, and yeah, when I came out of college with this foundation degree, I naively thought I would quite easily get a job in motorsport. But yeah, that just wasn't the case at all. And I found myself getting a little bit disheartened. I mean, I was fortunate that I was living with my parents. I was in the southwest of the country in Devon, and there's not a lot of automotive or motorsport industry in that part of the country. So I moved with my girlfriend to Surrey in the sort of southeast region, where there's a bit more happening, a bit more, it's not Motorsport Valley, it's a little bit outside of that, but it is, there's still a bit more going on. And even then, I really sort of had to broaden my search criteria. So I ended up, having this foundation degree, ended up broadening into just automotive roles. And I actually ended up getting a role doing emissions testing, essentially for a car magazine in this country called What Car Magazine. They basically had this, it was a feature called True MPG, where they would fit this emissions testing equipment to the back of a car, literally attach the exhaust pipe, hang on the back of the car, and we would drive it through various driving cycles, and it would analyse the exhaust gases and give a real fuel economy figure. And that was my sort of first job out of college, really, out of uni.
It's probably about as far removed from motorsport and performance as you can get, but a job's a job.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was the first job that actually I was able to pay rent and sort of, afford a life. But it wasn't motorsport, and I did it for a little over a year, and I was the whole time for that whole year, I was still looking for motorsport work because I knew that this wasn't what I did my degree for. It was quite interesting. It was science. I drove a brand new car every day because it was through this magazine. Every car they featured, every car that came through their doors for feature, I would have it for a day to do this testing on. So it was, it was a pretty interesting job, but not motorsport.
So just with the jobs that you're applying for that are in motorsport, what's the sort of the blocker that you're not getting these jobs? Is it the foundation degree that you did isn't what they're after, or is it a lack of practical experience, or something else?
I think to some extent it's practical experience. That has so much value at sort of your entry level roles.
Yeah. However, there's of course the catch-22 that in order to get the practical experience, you need the job.
Yeah. So some of it was, some of the roles I was looking at were too far away. Essentially, motorsport, apart from in the southwest, really it does spread out around the country, and the other one would come up, and it was sort of number 2 mechanic or a just sort of entry level engineer for a small team running a Porsche or something like that, or a caterer, even a couple of caterers perhaps. But they wouldn't be local to me, and I was like, well, I'm sort of based down here, and it was my fault really for putting that block on it, because I should have really just gone and done those jobs. I sort of restricted myself to, okay, I want to be able to commute to it, but I think to some extent it was my own fault. But yeah, there is definitely sort of the block of experience.
Yeah. Just in terms of that sort of location, I mean, it's much more of an issue for the likes of us here in the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, New Zealand in particular, we really have no professional racing here. Nothing that's sort of more than hobby level. There's not a lot of money or sponsorship in it. Australia is better, but it's still not like Europe. So, I mean, I think where I'm going with this, if I wanted to pursue that sort of career and direction from New Zealand or Australia, I think the first thing I'd be doing is packing my bags and heading to Europe, which is probably scary. But I think the other thing is when you're young, you're not tied down necessarily with a wife and a family. It's still probably a little bit scary to shift your life to the other side of the world or the other side of the UK, but it's much easier to do than in later life.
Yeah, it's funny said, because I was scared to go 100 miles away really, and when I look back, I think actually that's what I should have done sooner. But what I ended up doing was I was getting a bit bored and frustrated with this emissions testing job, and I'd really not got anywhere with my job search, and my CV had been out everywhere. And I ended up getting contacted by this guy who just he explained this job. He said, look, I've got a collection of classic touring cars. I like to take them and run them. I need someone, the collection is such now that I need someone to sort of help me look after them and sort of prep them for me. I thought, that's the sort of thing that I could definitely step into, that gives me that bit of experience to allow me to move into the next level. And I sort of explained that to him. I said, look, that sounds pretty interesting. I'm looking for some experience. That sounds good. Let's talk a bit more about it. He said, oh, fantastic. I forgot to mention I'm based in Sydney.
Okay. Yep.
So here was me, sort of not turning down, but sort of not going for roles that were 100 miles away. And then this one had sort of fallen in my lap, and it was the other side of the world. And honestly, I said no. I actually turned it down. And then, my girlfriend, she sort of sat down with me and said, look, now is the time to do this. This is what you need to do for your career. And in this time in your life, without those commitments, without kids and a house and a mortgage, now was the time to do it. So I went back to him and said, actually, I've had to think about it, and if the job's still there, I'd like to go for it. And 2 months later, I was packing my bags and moved to Sydney, and that was really the sort of stepping stone that everything else led on from to my career here. So I do owe a lot to Carey. That was the guy's name who sort of gave me that foot in the door.
Without sort of going too far down this particular rabbit hole, what sort of historic touring cars were you dealing with here, and then leading on from that, what were your specific roles to prep and run these for him?
So when I arrived, he ran an HR31 Skyline, a Group A touring car. So that was his thing. The Group A's were his passion. So that we started off with that, and then he moved into Touring Car Masters, was a series in Australia that I think maybe have changed name. I'm not sure it's still going. And we built and ran a Tirana, Holden Tirana.
Oh wow, yep.
For that one.
Probably no one from outside of Australia and New Zealand is going to know what we're talking about there, but I do, and that's what counts.
Yeah. So it's quite a quite cool car. It was that was a great series, and I got involved in that, and it was mostly mechanical prep. Really was what I was mostly responsible for, but everything really from the prep of the car, the sort of supporting the engineering, working with him to tune and dial in the suspension and the handling. It was really everything that I had, carbon fiber and fiberglass repairs.
So you're getting that broad sort of experience in the whole of the car prep and running.
Yeah, exactly. That was the thing. It really suited everything I'd done at university, my degree course I'd done. I just was able to put all that into practice there. And I absolutely loved it. And I was there for a year, and then my visa was running out, and I ended up coming back. I had options to stay with visa extension and such, but I sort of had done this 1 year in Australia, and I was missing home a bit, and was like, well, I've got a year of experience now. Let's come back to the UK and have another try at sort of going for those jobs again. And now I'm not so scared of a bit of distance traveling a bit. So yeah, I came back and didn't fall straight into a job, and I don't know if I was naive again to think that I might do, but it was back to the sort of I went to the Autosport show, with a huge stack of CVs physically printed out, 30 CVs that I'd actually tailored the cover letter on each one, because I'd looked at the list of traders who were going to be at Autosport. I'd written a cover letter specific to each trader. Hours and hours and hours spent prepping. Took these CVs there, handed them out. Spent a whole day there. Nothing from it. No call.
Must be frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I'd started applying for absolutely everything that I could apply for, and what actually happened was one of the guys I was at college with, he was doing some design work for an engine company who were making a few components for McLaren GT, who were sort of developing the 650, the 12C GT3, and then the 650 after that. And he said, look, I've got an email address of a guy at McLaren GT. I'll pass it on to you and you can maybe get in touch with him. So he did, and I sent through my CV. They didn't have a job out. I just fired my CV through there. And 4 or 5 days later, I get a phone call from the managing director there. He says, I'm not sure how your CV ended up on my desk, but we've got this role we're just about to create, and I think you'd be the right fit for it. And I went and had an interview there, and a couple of weeks later, I was working in race support engineering for McLaren GT. So
it's quite the step up from running a Tirana in Australia.
It was quite a step, and it was a great role. It was a good experience. It was McLaren GT back then was actually operated by an independent car builder race team, essentially, that had the license to use the McLaren name to build the McLaren GT car.
Ah, okay.
So we were in the old McLaren F1 building before they moved to the technology centre. We sort of had that facility. They'd given us that, but we weren't a big team. We were designing and developing a car and also running it on track. But we were of a size where everyone had to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
So I think perhaps my experience is what lent myself to that role as well, and it was very enjoyable because I did a bit of performance engineering, systems engineering, data. I was a data engineer. We basically supported race teams who ran the car that we'd designed, and I got sort of associated, basically seconded to Garage 59, they were called, and that was a team that ran in the Blancpain Endurance Series, doing the Spa 24-hour, 6-hour races all around Europe. And then we actually came across to Australia and did the Bathurst 12-hour in 2016. So I found myself back in Australia.
Back on familiar territory.
Yeah, it was nice. And we actually went on to win that race. And I was data engineer for that. And that was just like, at that moment there, that felt like a real highlight. I'd really achieved everything in my career that I really thought when I was at college that I might achieve. I'm at this 12-hour endurance race with these fantastic GT cars. We've won the race. I felt like, I was pretty content with my career then at that point.
How do you go forward from there?
Yeah. So I think it was just natural just to be looking at what roles were around. I was enjoying my time there. There was a little bit of a structural change at McLaren GT. It was becoming absorbed officially by McLaren themselves and the automotive division. So it was going to change around a little bit, and I wasn't sure how I would fit in that. There'd been no talk of redundancy or anything, but I just wasn't quite sure how the future of McLaren would look, or McLaren GT specifically. So I was just looking around, and a role came up in F1, and it was a systems technician. So I had some systems experience. The GT cars actually ran the same ECU management software. It was a McLaren ECU in the GT car, Tag ECU is called, and it used the same software as the F1 car. So I had a little bit of experience. So it was quite a logical and easy step across into Formula One, into what was a fairly entry-level role, but where it was different to most people at the team was I stepped straight into a trackside role, which is actually pretty unusual. Like engineering, mechanical roles, typically you spend some time working in the factory and sort of developing your skills and experience, and then you get a chance to go trackside. But I just stepped straight in.
Yeah, that makes sense. But you already had the runs on the board with the same electronic systems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that enabled me to step straight in, which was interesting, because I suddenly arrived trackside and I was just this new guy at the track, and no one knew who I was, and I didn't know who anyone was, and it was quite an intimidating experience actually, because suddenly I was in the big boy leagues.
Yeah, must be pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge sort of variety of in motorsport, and Formula One is really different to almost everything else, in how you operate. And certainly, I thought GT, I was with the GT stuff, and it was top level motorsport, but it's just different again in Formula One. It's just the way you operate, the manpower at the track, the number of people who are responsible for certain parts. It's a different beast entirely. So I was quite intimidated when I started, and it was tough to acclimatise to. But
okay, I want to put a pin in this for a moment, just while you were talking about your time at McLaren GT and just developing the 650S, essentially a hypercar but road car, into, well, supercar, I guess. Maybe hypercars came a little bit later, but anyway, taking a road car and turning it into a competitive GT race car. What sort of What are you changing? What's involved? I mean, obviously we all see the GT cars with a lot more aerodynamic features on the bodywork, but what else goes into this to make a competitive GT car?
Yeah, so we'd essentially take the monocoque off the production line from automotive. So we really just start with that carbon fiber monocoque. It's a pretty significant roll cage is the very first thing we're putting in there, and then it's pretty much all specific to the GT car. And we have GT uprights, suspension arms are all sort of specific to the GT car. It's all developed for adjustability, lightweight, but strong. Slight changes to the cooling package. So the road car has a radiator in each side. It's sort of behind the doors. We added an extra one at the front, so there's quite significant changes to the cooling layout. Engine wise, you're actually fairly restricted, and in fact, or literally restricted, in fact, because you have to restrict your power for the BOP, the balance and performance in GT racing. So the GT car is actually only running 570, 580 horsepower compared to the 650 horsepower that the road car would be running. So it is actually a detuned.
As I understand it, with the balance of performance, it's a combination of sort of boost limits, restrictors, and also additional ballast weight to the car. Am I on it there? Yeah.
That's right, yeah. So there's a ballast box essentially in the footwell, passenger footwell, that you have to sort of load up to meet sort of the lap time targets. Essentially, it's quite an interesting process they go through for balance performance, and it is done. You take your car to the track, and they are driven by a driver who has to set fairly equal lap times. Essentially, you have to really have. It's not just done on a let's do power and weight. It's actually quite kind of scientifically done on lap time.
Yeah, I think that's sort of when you start looking at car performance and you're trying to essentially equalize lap times over a wide variety of different cars. The power and weight is really only a small part of it. Important nonetheless, but you've got braking performance and outright cornering performance. So power, just dealing with power and weight is not the only way of doing this.
It oversimplifies it for sure. Yeah, it's so much more to it. But yeah, the GT car was quite far removed from the road car. We'd have wider bodywork on it, different brakes and wheel sizes, and there is converting to a GT3 spec as it was is a significant overhaul of the car. And as you touched upon, the aerodynamic package as well, and engine management. We don't use the OEM ECU. We use still a McLaren part, but it's a motorsport ECU.
Yeah, I suppose safe to assume as well the factory DCT gearbox gets ditched for a proper paddle shift sequential dog box.
Exactly, yeah, it's an X-Track box, so that's with a pneumatic shifting system, and it's quite a complex car. And again, even when I started there to learn that was a big undertaking, and then you transition from that to a Formula One car, almost unrecognisable, to be honest. And I'm glad I had the stepping stone of GT, because it at least gave me a little bit of an entry into top level motorsport electronics and control systems and the like. So.
Just one last question on that part of your career. You said this was basically run under the McLaren name, but as a satellite operation. Were you getting engineering and tech support direct from McLaren, or were you guys just like, here's the car, figure it out, you're on your own?
Well, we developed the car independently. McLaren just gave us the license to do it, and we developed and built this car, and then we didn't have any further support from McLaren Automotive as it was then. It was our thing from then on. We had our in-house engine team developing it, doing the engine dyno tuning and everything. So it was really, they just gave us the bits off the production line, and then it was all us. Everything was in-house, and then we would sell it to customers. As GT racing is, it's customer racing, so we would then market this car and sell it, and then provide engineering support to the customers.
Okay, yep.
In order to run one of these cars, you do need someone with the software, with the license to configure your boost limits and your ambient settings for that championship. And so it was very reliant on having trackside support, which we provided. We had a team of guys who would go to America and support those series, go to Europe, go to Asia.
Yeah. All right, let's come back to the entry into the McLaren F1 team. And you said you were involved with systems engineering, which is kind of a fairly ambiguous title. So let's break that down and understand what that term actually means.
Yeah, so systems engineering, essentially all of the electronics on the car and how they operate, how they're controlled, basically falls under that bracket. When I started, I was doing instrumentation technician role, so that essentially meant that I was responsible for everything that we would fit to the car for a Friday. So on a Friday in a practice session in Formula One, you're allowed to run a lot of extra hardware on the car, sensors and additional logging projects, we call them, where you can monitor a raft of extra things that you wouldn't legally be allowed to have in a qualifying or race session. You also wouldn't want them because the extra weight. Whereas on a Friday, on a practice session, you can say, okay, I'll take the penalty of weight and have all this extra data.
So this is like the likes of the aero fences that we see them occasionally run, that sort of thing.
Yeah, those are the sort of the biggest, most obvious things. But unbeknownst to most people watching it, a car on a Friday is absolutely chock full of additional vibration logging sensors, potentiometers, thermocouples that you just don't see. So that was my responsibility. So I would install that on both the cars and maintain that equipment. And then I progressed to actually being responsible for the whole electrical system of one car. So there was me on one car and then my opposite number on the other car. And that's now sort of a responsibility of all of the standard fit sensors that we run, all of the electronic hardware, all the modules, all the CAN devices, and the wiring harnesses front to back of the car. So it fell under my remit. Installation, maintenance of all that, and operation of it, calibration as well. So all of that essentially from a laptop at the side of the garage that's linked on the network to the car.
So you're kind of one of the people looking at an array of screens while the car's on track, but not necessarily maybe monitoring oil pressure, coolant temperature and pressure, more sort of a layer deeper than that. Is that sort of, am I on the right track there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, we would sit, I mean, there's a whole team of engineers behind the scenes you don't tend not to see on the TV, but we would all sit at what we call the battle stations, where we have two 32-inch monitors for each person. And in my role and my colleagues' role, we were just exactly as you say, really. We're looking at screens of data. We've got about 400 parameters that are scrolling live across these two screens. So it's pretty intense screens of data. And we're not specifically looking at what the temperatures are and concerning ourselves about, actually, that's a couple of degrees colder than it should be. We're really looking at, are the systems healthy? Are the sensors healthy? Is everything working? And we were really the first line of defense for failing sensors or things being obviously going wrong. So we see, for example, a water pressure sensor has spiked off high or low. We see that, and although we do have an expert at the track who is concerning themselves with what they need to do to the cooling system, so when you're in a race you're not adjusting it, but obviously everything up before that. But if we're looking at it and we're seeing this happen, we're saying, okay, something's not right, and we very quickly have to decide, is that real or is that a sensor that's failing? And we will then go straight onto the radio to the relevant person. We've got obviously an intercom panel with a lot of various groups on it, and we can just contact them and say, this has happened, we think it's a sensor failure, not real pressure.
Okay. Just for the benefit of our listeners, how do you make a decision as to whether a sensor output is real or is likely the result of a sensor that's dying or some other wiring issue?
Yeah, it's a good question, because there isn't a straight answer, really. I think a great deal of it comes from experience, but we sort of tend to look at a couple of things. So we'll look firstly at a sensor. Is it even plausible? Is it possible that a pressure has become what it has become, without seeing? A good example was actually we had a gearbox oil pressure sensor issue just in recent memory, and it looked like gearbox oil pressure was spiking incredibly high, and people are getting a little bit sort of panicked about, God, the gearbox oil pressure is too high, and then we go, well, actually, the gearbox oil cooler couldn't sustain that type of pressure. So if that was real, then actually you would have other problems that you'd see elsewhere. So you have to go, okay, that can't be real. Let's have a look at the voltage, the supply of that sensor. Let's see if there's any other sensors that are sharing that supply that are also affected. So is it an electrical issue? Is it common across multiple systems? And from there, you're trying to make these decisions in as few seconds as possible, because if this is happening in the race, and you need to say, okay, well, if that temperature is what it is, or that pressure is what it is, we're going to need to get onto the race engineer and say, you're either going to have to retire the car, slow down, get in clean air, alter the driving of the car, or you're going to actually say, I'm not going to tell the race engineer about this because this is a sensor that's failing and there's nothing that we need the driver to do. I will, however, tell the person who cares about that system, the aerodynamics engineer who's worried about the cooling of the car, I might say, look, you've probably seen this reading what it is, ignore it, sensor failure.
Yeah.
It's not real.
On that basis, particularly when there's so much money riding on the result of every F1 session and race, is there built-in redundancy for maybe some of the key sensors, mission critical, like the engine cannot operate or the gearbox cannot operate without these?
Yeah, absolutely. We really sort of build redundancy. The thing about F1 is you're on a weight limit constantly, and also you need the reliability. So given no weight limit, you would just say, okay, give me 2 of everything, give me 3 of everything, give me just sensors everywhere. That there's so much redundancy built in, you just can't afford to do that from a weight perspective, and there's obviously cost involved. So the critical systems we certainly do. Off the top of my head, things I think of would be gear shift, gearbox position sensors, drum position sensors, essentially in the gearbox. We actually have 3 of those for redundancy and plausibility of signal as well. You have to run 3 because if one were to fail, the system can look at it and go itself, within the hardware and the coding, it can say, okay, something looks odd, but these 2 still agree. So actually I can disregard that. Whereas if you only have 2 sensors and one of them starts reading an unexpected value, the ECU doesn't know which to trust, doesn't know what's right.
So I think you've just answered my next question there, was with the redundancy, whether this is something that you trackside and manually, all right, we're going to disable that sensor and now we're using that, but no, it's built into the code.
To some extent it is, yes. Other things are not necessarily built in, and there are multiple sensors in the braking system, for example, that individually could fail and could start negatively affecting the system, but we as humans almost can look at it and understand, okay, well actually if we switch that sensor off, which the driver can do via reasonably complicated steering wheel command, but we can instruct him to do that, then the ECU with that turned off starts using a backup sensor that, okay, maybe it's further from the source, so it's not quite as accurate or responsive, so it's a second level of sort of redundancy almost. But there does still need to be a human element, some aspect of intervention from us. And ultimately we're always working on trying to automate as much as we can and write logic and rules for it, but at the end of the day you still need someone sat there looking at the data, and if we do manage to automate it all, then that will be a few of us out of jobs.
It may happen. AI is coming for us.
Yeah.
Just like with obviously Formula One, the pinnacle of motorsport, but the same things sort of trickle back into just our average sort of enthusiast level motorsport cars. And I've sort of drummed this into our tuning courses. Well, yeah, anyone can learn how to tune, and you don't necessarily need to have had a background as a mechanic or a background in electronics. Where I'm going with this is, over my career of tuning cars, I would say that probably no more than 1 in 5 cars that I dyno tuned would come into the shop, go on the dyno, get tuned and leave with no issues. The other 4 would require some level of diagnostics because something just isn't playing the game. And once you get to that point, then even just a basic background understanding of electronics or mechanical components, it's so helpful to start diagnosing what's going wrong, particularly when a sensor's not reading properly or something of that nature. Wiring issues are just so common at the enthusiast level. I kind of hope and expect that maybe they're a bit more dialed in at the Formula One level, but still, we're still dealing with the same systems: 5-volt supplies, 0-volt sensor grounds, and an analog voltage. The principles are the same, correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah, and we do everything we can to avoid those issues that you get at the sort of the enthusiast level, but invariably we still experience them. The system is so incredibly complex. I mean, there's nearly 1,000 electrical connectors on the car front to back, so there's a lot of interfaces there. There's a lot of crimp terminals. There's a lot of junctions. There's a lot of places where there can be maybe human error or another fault, really a sensor fault or something, but despite our best efforts we still experience them, and we test all our own harnesses actually prior to going on the car. We do have an in-house Cirrus tester that everything goes on and passes checks there.
So that's I think they call them a hypot tester, is that correct?
Exactly that, sorry, yeah.
So can you give us a really quick understanding of what that Cirrus tester actually does and why you use it?
Yeah, so it's quite a complex bit of kit. So it's essentially allows us through various combinations of adapters to connect every sub-harness on the car to essentially a voltage supply and a PC that will understand the pinout of that and essentially tests every single circuit in that harness, puts it through voltage checks, continuity checks, leakage tests. To be honest, I couldn't do it justice for what it does, because essentially for me it was so well set up at McLaren that everything is just plug it in and hit go, and you get a sort of go no go on it. We do a small percentage of harnesses in house, but we also get contractors to make harnesses for us, and we buy those in. Everything, whether it's in house or bought in, will go via this high-pot tester before it makes it to the car.
All right, so in a nutshell, you're going to have the confidence once it comes off that test that the pinout is correct. Obviously, that's one of the key elements, but also there's no internal leakage between different conductors, for example. So you're going to have the confidence that that harness is going to be fit for purpose. We had the privilege of doing a tour around Renvale back in 2019 when we headed to the UK for the Goodwood Festival of Speed. And for those who haven't heard that name, Renvale make wiring harnesses for, I think at the time it was every Formula One team with the exception of Williams, not to mention probably hundreds of other projects as well. And I remember talking to the guy who was building a harness for, I think it was a Mercedes at the time, and he said that they would replace the harness on that particular car, I believe he said, after every round of racing. And I get this drive for reliability, but I was sort of trying to balance in my own mind, like, yes, okay, things will have to have a life in motorsport, but also if you've got a harness that you've just done a round of racing with and it's proven to be reliable, it's kind of like, in my mind, is it better the devil you know or the devil you don't? In other words, are we going to replace this expensive harness that's just proven itself for a round of racing and put in another one, albeit run through a high-pot tester and potentially find an issue with it?
Yeah, I think the thing about electronics and harnesses particularly is that they are very difficult to life. Yeah, and what you touched upon there with changing that harness every race, or every single component of that car has a unique life code associated with it. Every time that car goes on track, there's a complete, what we call the build sheet, that holds every single number and records all the mileage. And things like suspension components are quite easy to life, because you go, okay, that's done. Certainly in this era, especially with cost cap, we aren't changing things every race. Things will have to do multiple races, because you just can't be throwing parts at a car like you perhaps once could, with it being pre-cost cap era. But suspension components, they come off, they can have NDT testing, non-destructive testing. They can go through fairly tangible processes to sort of check it's good or not, or even it will get to a point where it's end of life and we won't even if it does pass those tests, it'll be put back on a shelf and not used again. Whereas with electrical stuff, your harnesses, you have to be a little bit pragmatic. Exactly as you say, it's okay. Yeah, the document now, the OPROC, the operational procedure we have for this says, okay, yeah, it's done 800 kilometers. It should come off and be inspected. But actually, does it work? Yes, it does. Have we had any problems with it? No. We end up sort of testing the harness on the car almost. It's really does it work or does it not work? And there certainly are times when we will not change something because there's actually risk of introducing a problem. Certainly with harnesses that run through the cockpit, for example, that's a very confined space. There's a lot of cable tie blocks through there. So what you're saying is, okay, someone's got to get in there with a pair of flush cuts and they're going to have to cut those ties off. Well, what if they catch the harness doing that, or catch a different harness that isn't the one you're changing now, but it's also on that same cable tie block? That's not totally fair on the mechanics who work on the car. They're obviously extremely careful for things like that, but those sort of human factors can creep in.
You're just bringing in unintended consequences, really. Trying to make something better and making it worse by accident.
Exactly. So I think certainly in electronics, we do have to sort of have a bit more of a common sense head with regard to lifing, and certainly car critical parts we are more conservative with. If it is something that it will be what we call a showstopper, then we'll just say, look, we've got the spare one here, actually let's just change it. But otherwise, if it isn't going to be a showstopper part, or if it, as you say, might introduce consequences, then we'll sort of not opt to change it just for the sake of it.
Okay. We just want to take a moment out of our interview with Joel and talk about a package of courses that I think is going to be great for you if you want to learn how to tune your own car, much like Joel did, and that is our tuning starter package. Normally valued at $417 US, you can use the coupon code JOEL100, that's JOEL 100. That'll bring it down to just $317 US. Now this course or package of courses really covers everything that you need to know to get yourself from zero previous knowledge up to speed to actually tune your first car. We begin with our EFI tuning fundamentals, which will teach you the fundamentals or core tuning principles that you need to understand in order to be able to tune any engine from start to finish. You'll learn how the engine operates as well as how the ECU operates and how the engine responds to both fuel and ignition timing. We're also including our Understanding Air-Fuel Ratio course. This is probably the most misunderstood topic in the world of EFI tuning. We'll teach you what the term air-fuel ratio even means. We'll give you some safe starting air-fuel ratios for your engine, and then we'll teach you how to find the ideal air-fuel ratios for your particular application. Next, we move into our practical application courses, which includes our practical standalone tuning course, perfect for those of you who want to learn to tune aftermarket standalone ECUs. We've also got our practical reflash tuning course, which is ideal for those who want to learn how to reflash or retune the factory fitted ECU that came equipped in your late model car. Both of these cover the generic process, so they are applicable to any engine. It doesn't matter what brand of engine or brand of ECU or reflashing software you're personally involved with, these courses will be perfect. These courses also both include a library of worked examples, which is where we cover off our step-by-step process. We use a step-by-step process to make the process of tuning from start to finish easier and a little bit more bite-sized. For example, our practical standalone tuning course, this breaks it down into 10 individual steps. By following that process from start to finish, you can ensure that you haven't overlooked any critical steps that could waste money, waste time, or even potentially damage your expensive engine. Once you've gone through that 10-step process, our worked example library covers that process in detail on a wide range of different ECUs and different engines to give you a broad range of experience. We're also including as part of this package 24 months of gold membership, which gives you access to our private members only forum. This is the best place to get trustworthy answers to your particular tuning questions, and you'll also get access to our live weekly webinars where we cover a particular topic on tuning, engine building, wiring, or 3D modeling in CAD, just to name a few, and dive in deep for around about an hour. If you can't watch live, as a gold member, you get access to our existing webinar archive where we've got close to 400 hours of existing content. So remember, this package deal, $417 US. Normally, use the coupon code JOEL100 to bring it down to just $317 US. Even with that coupon code, you can break that payment down into as many as 8 individual weekly payments just to make it that much more affordable. You're also still completely protected with our 60-day no questions asked money back guarantee. So if for any reason you purchase and decide it's not quite right for you, no problem. Let us know. You'll get a full refund of the purchase price. We'll leave that coupon code as well as a link to the starter package in the show notes. Now let's get back to our interview with Joel. I'm interested if we can, I'm assuming you've got some domain expertise in this, even if you're not necessarily constructing the harnesses yourself. Always a very hotly debated topic anytime we bring it up on our social media, and that's the topic, of course, of crimping versus soldering. And it just becomes really divisive. And I think usually the sort of argument we hear back is, well, I soldered the wires together for the speakers on my car stereo back in the 90s, and the subwoofer's still going strong, so obviously it's fine. And I mean, that's the difficult one for me because, yeah, I'm not here saying that you solder a wire together and it's instantly going to fail. Clearly, that's not the case. But it does also bring in the potential for some problems, particularly when we're in a motorsport environment. We're now introducing high levels of vibration. And basically that soldered joint has the potential to work harden and crack and fail. The flip side of that is we sort of get people saying, well, I crimped some wires together using, an auto parts store crimp tool, some generic pile of crap, and it pulled out of the crimp. So obviously crimping's no good. Well, no, we're talking about using proper quality equipment, the correct parts from TE Connectivity, DMC crimp tools with the correct positioners. There's levels to this, but if we're using industry best practice standards, a crimp should be more reliable than solder. So Now that I've sort of prefaced the discussion, I'm really keen to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, the easy one is to say that absolutely nothing is soldered on the F1 car. We rely entirely on crimps, and it is the quality tool and the quality crimp and the quality connector. It's I think when you're looking at enthusiast level, people are often budget, price driven, and that on the tools they're going to use or the connectors they're going to use. Well, in Formula One, we're not driven at that level. We're driven by reliability and quality. So we have connectors that might be, some of them are over £100 per connector, and that's what you pay for that motorsport quality, mil spec sort of connector and crimps. So yeah, I know the debate very well, and certainly I'm guilty of it in my hobby and car building and work on my own cars. Is that I might not have the best quality connectors and best quality crimp tool, and I'll have that crimp that pulls out, or I'll go to solder something and it'll break. But at the top level, it's just quality crimps through and through.
I think it is important to also say that for every rule, there's an exception. I mean, maybe not in F1, but at the level we work at, hey, sometimes there's going to be a connector where you absolutely have no choice but to solder. And then it's understanding how you can solder and protect, or basically protect against the downsides or potential failure points that solder has. So a key sort of example of that would be maybe we're dealing with a sensor where it doesn't have a reliable connector for motorsport use. And maybe it's an actuator, actually. Ignition coils would be a classic example. We deal with some Toyota ignition coils where the coil itself is great, but the connector is known to be problematic once it's sort of done a season of racing. So how do we deal with that? Well, we pot the connector, and that requires, interestingly, soldering wires onto the terminals inside the connector. So straight away, we then introduce this problem where at the end of that soldered joint, this is where the wire can fail. But we can protect that against relative movement and vibration by then potting the body of the connector. So that stops any relative movement of the wire, so we're back to reliable. We go one step further and we'll put a heat molded boot on the end of that gives more mechanical strain relief. So then we can terminate in an Autosport connector. Now we have a reliable connection. So as I say, for every exception, for every rule there is an exception. I just feel before we get bombarded with hate emails, I'll probably just add that into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
All right, let's get back to your career. We've gone down this sort of tangent, but let's get back to your career. So I think you said to me, you've been now working for McLaren in the F1 team for about 9 years. How's that role sort of changed for you? How's your responsibilities changed over that 9 years?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, initially I started off with instrumentation and then reasonably quickly moved to being responsible for one of the cars in the garage. And that's a very enjoyable role, and I stayed sort of in that capacity for a number of years, just gaining experience really. And as I said, when you're looking at data and trying to understand the systems, experience is key. So I really sort of relished that role and built quite a lot of experience in it. And ultimately, I got to the point 4 or so years in that role 4 or 5 years almost, where I actually felt like I wasn't bringing anything. I wasn't learning anymore, and I wasn't bringing anymore. And what was almost happening was I was getting a little bit almost complacent in that role. And that I've done the same thing, looked at the same data for that many years. I know the car front to back, and what I didn't want to start doing was introducing potential reliability risks because I've been a bit complacent. So I said, look, I said to McLaren, I think I need something to develop me to freshen this role up, and I basically progressed up to from a technical role into a more managerial role. So I then moved up and started looking after the guys who were doing the role I was doing. I took a step upwards into a team leader capacity, and then took on more responsibility for the cars, but less onus on me to be looking directly at the data. I still have a car per screen, but I've still got those guys under me who have 2 screens for a car each, and sort of progressing into a more, say, like managerial role, a bit away from the technical side, which was a little bit out of my comfort zone initially, having primarily been technical through my career up until that point. Taking on responsibility and managerial aspects was a new challenge, which I've enjoyed for the last couple of years now. And it's I think, quite a thrill to sort of have that level of responsibility on me and be kind of important at the track. That's quite satisfying. So
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think what you've just highlighted there is really important, to be able to be that self-critical and understand that you're getting complacent, because when you get complacent, that's when things do go wrong. So I think, kudos to you for noting that. But also, I mean, I think a little bit like myself, if I'm doing the same thing just forever, you do kind of lose the passion to a degree. I think I really enjoy learning new systems, learning new products, and we're lucky that the automotive technology in the aftermarket is relatively rapidly changing. So there is also always something new to come through, and that's what really kind of keeps me motivated in this industry. The other part, though, is moving into a more management role. I'm interested that there's a big disconnect between the technical aspects of the role, sort of what the systems engineering is about, but that's very different to managing people. And, that's not necessarily a skill that, if you're exceptional at your systems engineering job, that doesn't infer that you're also going to be great at managing people. So on that note, is this something that McLaren internally help you with, developing these management skills, and sort of how have you found that worked out?
I mean, they're incredibly supportive, really. I mean, what they don't want to do is they don't want to lose people. They'd invested quite a lot in me, and I was enjoying my time at the team, and I think ultimately I would have looked elsewhere had I not been able to have an opportunity to progress. Quite where that would have been, it's hard to really think what I would do, but in order to sort of foster that, they are very supportive. Putting you on management courses, having you sort of shadow people in management roles to pick up how you do handle people. As you say, it was my first time managing people and looking after people, and that is different. It's electrical systems are one thing, and then trying to deal with people on your team is another. And I was quite fortunate in that I only have a small team. It's four guys under me who I need to sort of look after, and they're actually a great bunch of guys and quite easy to manage. So I'm quite fortunate that my sort of introduction into management was an easy one and well supported by McLaren. They're really keen in investing in people, really, because as much as the car is the car and the driver, the big headline things, it's maintaining that staff and that expertise in-house that they're keen on.
Okay. Looking in from the outside, I would sort of assume that Formula One is maybe not a career path that's particularly compatible with a family sort of environment. What I'm getting at here is there sort of a limit to how long you're prepared to work in Formula One, where you actually are traveling to 24 rounds all around the world each season?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually, because there's sort of two camps, and I find myself falling into the middle, really. But we have like the young guys who come along and they'll do 3-4 years, 4 seasons of it perhaps, and then get some great experience, travel the world, and then just go off. That's enough traveling for them. They'll either move and do something either factory based, or they'll just go off and do something totally different, or they do a short spell. Or we've got like we always call it the lifers, the guys who are the stalwarts of the team, who've done 20 plus years trackside, who've got families at home, they've got wives, they've got kids. They've managed to make that work, and that doesn't work for everybody. And you can really see that in the team, because there are a few guys who are, like I say, those 20, almost 30 years. But for the majority of people, it is that sort of home life and family pressures almost. But I don't want to put a negative connotation on it, because it's not a bad thing. But it's
and I think it's just different for everyone. It's simply a consideration. I'm not to say it's right or wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've sort of found myself doing 9 years. It's ninth year trackside now, and when I started, I didn't anticipate doing that long, really. And I've got a very supportive girlfriend here, and it's just worked well for me, and I'm still enjoying it. And I think that's the main thing, is you just have to enjoy it to keep doing it. I'm not going to pretend I'm not very fortunate to be doing what I'm doing, but it is tough. As
No
you
doubt.
touch on there, it's 24 races, and people who watch on the TV, you see the car on track Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Well, we're actually arriving at the track on a Tuesday. So, and we're coming home on a Monday, so it's almost a week per race. when there's races on consecutive weekends, well, that's the whole time away. We're not coming back in between them. So it does add up. When you also add on the sort of testing that we do and other events we have through the year, we're out of the country nearly 30 weeks of the year. So yeah, it's over half the year we are away from home. And okay, it's a great job. And I know a lot of people sit there and go, you can't complain about that. I'd kill to have that job.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I'm not going to sit here and say, no, I'm hard done by, but it does take its toll eventually. And that's why you do get those people who are going to do 3-4 years. And I certainly thought I was one of them. And my circumstances are such that I've carried on a bit longer and I'm still enjoying it. But that moment I stop enjoying it, I think I'll have to stop doing it. That's the thing, really. It's too much to be away that much and not enjoy it.
I think, obviously, my career path very different to yours, but it does involve a modest amount of travel. I think the busiest year for us, we were out of the country for 3 full months in a year. So obviously, again, nothing like what you're doing, but you post up the Instagram stories and the Instagram post, which is just the highlights reel. But the reality is, you're on a plane for 15, 18 hours. You're living out of a suitcase, out of a hotel room. You're not there on holiday. You're there to do a job. I'm not trying to say that I didn't enjoy it. It's got some great aspects, but after you've done it for a while, I sort of find it starts to wear a little bit thin. And definitely these days we've pulled back our travel significantly more. And I've got a young family as well, so I have to be fair to them. But again, it's different for everyone. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. On the sort of note of sort of what a career trajectory could look like after Formula One. I mean, you've mentioned the lifers. What does this set you up for in terms of potential job opportunities once you're ready to maybe move from Formula One? Obviously, there's sort of nothing up above it.
Well, I mean, it's tricky. To be honest, personally, I think if I left Formula One, I would probably leave motorsport. I think I would look for perhaps automotive or another.
I would have thought it would lend itself quite nicely to aerospace as well.
Yeah, it certainly does, and certainly people up in the engineering office, who do a stint in McLaren, they can sidestep into other roles. I mean, there's I know 1 or 2 guys have actually gone to NASA, SpaceX, gone to pretty impressive roles, Boeing and the like. That there's certainly progress across to those industries. But yeah, I mean, from a personal level, I mean, I think, as you say, like there's nothing really straight above Formula One if you want to be in motorsport. So as much as I'd be sad to leave motorsport, I think I would sort of say, look, I'm done with traveling and I just want to go and work on my own car in the garage at the weekends and have a normal life, for want of a better word, really. It's
Yeah. I'm also interested, this is what I kind of found when I was running my performance workshop back 15 years ago now, I guess it was. And I owned and ran that shop for about 13 years. And really, I built it from the ground up because I was passionate about motorsport. And really, it was initially in the early days just a way of finding money to fund the build of my import drag car. Basically, every cent that I earned was just poured straight into this bottomless blue pit of a Mitsubishi Evo 3 drag car. And what I found after 13 years of that was, for me, working 5-6 days a week on customer cars, it kind of destroyed my own passion for then, hit the weekends like, all right, great, it's time to crack into my own car. Yeah, that's not that exciting. I've just done that on other people's cars for 40-50 hours. I just want to go sit on the couch and watch Netflix or something of that nature. How's that sort of worked for you? Is there does it affect your personal passion?
Yeah, I think my role at work is very different to anything I really apply in my own projects and the like. So I think it's different enough. I'm in motorsport, but it's so far removed from club level and from what I'm doing in my garage at home. My dad always gave me some advice actually that was, don't turn your hobby into your career. You'll stop enjoying it. And actually, when I was initially taking on motorsport and going to studying this degree, he was like, well, I hope it works out for you, but actually, my advice would be to not make something you enjoy into your career. And I've been fortunate enough to still maintain that enjoyment in my own sort of project. So
yeah, that's such a tough one. I mean, the old story has always been, do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
And I think your point there is correct, because obviously, as I just explained, I kind of lived through that as well. I think I've managed to sort of go the other way, and now I am still doing something I'm incredibly passionate about, but it hasn't sort of destroyed my passion for working on my own vehicle. I think a podcast I listened to basically explains like what you should be looking for when you're young, and it's almost like a Venn diagram. You want to do something that you enjoy, but that thing that you enjoy also has to be economically viable. And not only that, you also want to be doing something that you can potentially be in the top 10%. That sweet spot in that Venn diagram is then economic security. You're going to be doing something you're passionate about, something you're good at, something that can make you good money, and you're going to be in demand. I think if you can find that sweet spot, happy days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm pretty fortunate to think that I am in that sweet spot. Now it does. The thing that I lack is time, really, at home. And that's what I struggle with my own projects at home. And I'd love to be in the garage more. I'm just not at home enough. And when I am home, I obviously want to see my girlfriend. I want to see my family. So there are the pressures that prevent me from sort of making sort of the most of the projects and getting in the garage and such. So yeah, it's a difficult balance. Absolutely.
I think you've just really hit on something that is important. I mean, there's a lot of talk about work-life balance, and I sort of come at it from a slightly different angle. I think it's more around maybe it was almost seasons of your life. And I think when you're young and you're not tied down with kids, wife, family, mortgage, etc., it's much easier at that point to really commit yourself to a job or a career, put in the hard hours and actually get to that point of sort of economic security. And then in later life, you can maybe pull back from that, and then you start getting a bit more of that balance where you can commit to your relationships, etc. So I think that sort of seems to be natural, rather than trying from the outset to have this theoretically ideal work-life balance. I think we're probably getting a little bit too out in the weeds now, so we'll get back to motorsport. Just with your significant exposure to Formula One, I'm interested in your take on the direction it's gone, and I'll kind of give you a broad understanding of what I mean. I, despite having been involved in cars and motorsport my entire life, I never really followed Formula One that closely. I mean, I was broadly knew what was going on, but I wasn't really that interested in getting up at 3 a.m. to watch around. I think, like a lot of people, I came to Formula One as a result of Drive to Survive, and since that I have been a fairly avid watcher of Formula One. And what I've sort of seen as well from reading Adrian Newey's book, How to Build a Car, he sort of at the end of that gets up on a soapbox and kind of has a bit of a rant about the rules, the direction the FIA are going, in terms of basically defining where you can and can't have bodywork, and then where you can have bodywork, what shape it's got to be. In your opinion, are we sort of stifling innovation, which I think is what Formula One really was known for, and almost moving more towards a spec series, the likes of maybe IndyCar, where you buy a spec chassis from a manufacturer, you buy an engine, you put it together, and basically anyone can run an IndyCar? Drastically oversimplifying, of course.
Yeah, I think when you end up with sort of regulations that remain reasonably consistent for any period of time, you do end up with everyone sort of kind of merging on the same design, same concepts. I'm not sure about stifling as much as every F1 team is looking to exploit the regulations or look for loopholes in the regulations, and McLaren certainly themselves work hard to. We're certainly not breaking the rules. What we're looking for is where there aren't rules.
Bit of talk about your flexible rear wing last season.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we became quite prominent in the media for that, and it was deemed to be legal, and just an interesting interpretation of the rules, or lack of rule in certain aspects. And I think that's where the innovation comes, is when you can find where they're missing rules. And what the FIA do is they'll introduce a new rule to kind of close that door, sort of close that loophole. And ultimately, the longer you go, certainly with static regulations, the more time they have to close these doors and these loopholes. So you do stifle it, but they do change up the regulations reasonably regularly. 2026 is coming. There's pretty significant changes to the power unit, to the aerodynamics, to the geometry of the car. It's going to be quite drastically different. we've seen a few renders of what the car might look like based on the interpretation of the rules, and it's quite drastically different. And I think when we hit the ground in 2026, you're going to have 10 very different looking cars on the grid, or 11 if we have the extra teams. So it's going to be, I think, very interesting then. Whereas come to the end of this year, you are going to have a lot of cars that look very similar.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I guess the flip side of this as well, with a big rule change like we're seeing coming into 2026, and a lot of flexibility, or maybe some more flexibility than you've currently got under the rules we're running now, it runs the risk of one team kind of finding a combination that's just head and shoulders above the rest of the field and kind of running away with the win. Although I guess you could argue we did see exactly that in the start of the hybrid era with Mercedes, and then obviously Red Bull over the last few years have done an exceptional job with their platform of the ground effect era as well. So it's like, does it matter?
Well, I think what is different now, or 2026, is we're in this cost cap era. So you haven't got that huge advantage that the teams with big money had. Yeah, so really it is down to those teams who have invested in the people, to have those people around them to come up with these ideas. And you may well be right. We may well see a team with something different that is absolutely the right thing, and the other teams have gone the wrong way. But what it does, open up to is a level playing field. We could and should see any one of the teams up there. I'd hope that it isn't always just Red Bull or Mercedes, or I'd like it to be us again, but it doesn't stand to reason. We won a championship, we're hoping to win another, but it's a level playing field and we might get it wrong.
And I think ultimately the spectators, no matter which driver or team you're backing, what we do want to see is close competition. I don't want to see Red Bull, for example, with their two cars in 1-2 and winning by 45 seconds. That's not fun. Basically, then you're just looking at the battle for third, fourth, and fifth. So I think, close racing is hopefully what we're sort of heading towards. I don't know. We'll see.
I think so, yeah. And 2024 was a great example, because we just had some of the closest racing that we'd had for so long. And the championship came down to the last race, manufacturer championship, which is great to see. And it's almost a shame it took that many years of regulation, tweaks and changes to get us to that. And it pains me to say that probably 2026 you may end up with a couple of outlying teams, and we might have to go through that pain again. The FIA do a lot of good work to try and level that playing field, but invariably, especially with a big rule change, you just don't know what's going to happen.
With obviously being very careful with NDAs, etc., are you able to kind of give us any sort of high level understanding of the development path that McLaren had last year that kind of turned their season around? I mean, they weren't exactly nowhere at the start of the season, but compared to Lando and Oscar at the end of the season, McLaren was genuinely a front running team.
Yeah, we had reasonable structure changes in staffing, in sort of 22, 23, and it was, the thing about that is it takes time for the effect of that to actually hit the racetrack. So we, as a team, knew what we needed to do and who we needed where, but we just knew that actually we are not going to be strong in 2023, and even the start of 2024. We knew that what we had in the pipeline was going to be good. We had the right people in the right places. We had the right results in the wind tunnel, with everything we were testing, but we had to get that to the car. And it was, in fact, the upgrade we brought to Miami and Lando won. That was a real milestone turning point in the team. But actually, Andrea Stella, our team principal, is very calm, collected, calculated guy, and he really sort of, this was his plan all along, and he saw it all happening, and it came to fruition exactly really as he expected it to.
I guess most people watching probably wouldn't comprehend the lead time of the design work for a Formula One car. You're not just hitting the ground at the start of the season with a brand new car that's just fresh. That design and development work, started 9-10 months ago, longer maybe?
Yeah, you basically have to weigh up the cost benefit of developing the car for that season and then applying resource to the next season's car.
Particularly with the cost caps, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So we really did focus on 2024 for as much as we could, because we saw we had a chance here. So perhaps our move to this season was a little bit later, but there is such a big lead time, as you say. It's 12 months really in the making. And obviously we're already thinking about the big rule change. We're diverting resource to 2026 already.
It's going to be important.
Yeah, it's important, and that playing field is level, so we need to maximise our chance there. So that's not to say that we're not working on the 2025 car. It's such a delicate balance of resource. We'll be bringing upgrades for sure, but
it must be very hard weighing up how to allocate the resources, both manpower and financial, for the 25 versus the 26 car.
Yeah, and the implications on cost cap as well, because if you start putting resource into the 2026 car when you're in the 2025 year, then that can impact the cost cap for 2025. It doesn't, you don't get a bit of next year's budget. Fundamentally, we're beyond the scope of my role now, really.
Oh yeah. No, I'm sort of almost asking for a bit of crystal ball gazing here. More to do just a general high level understanding of what considerations are needing to be made here. And while we're talking about crystal ball gazing, obviously there's been a lot made of the shift from Red Bull for Adrian Newey to Aston Martin, and no argument that the guy's the most successful car designer of modern Formula One. How much do you feel that's going to impact Red Bull? Where I'm going with this is, obviously Adrian Newey is the big name, but there are a team of incredibly talented aerodynamicists and designers working under him, who in their own right are very intelligent, creating some amazing aerodynamic products. What's your take on this? Is Red Bull going to be lost without Adrian Newey?
As you say, Adrian Newey is that big name, but you're exactly right. It's a huge team of people, and yes, they work under him, but those people who are there have learned from him for sure, and it is a learnable skill. It's not. Adrian Newey is obviously incredibly talented, as you say, got this incredible record, but I don't think it necessarily means straight away that he's gone, they're going to struggle. I think they'll have a harder job, perhaps. And likewise, I don't think you're going to say Aston Martin are now going to come straight out, on top because they've got Adrian Newey. I think it's going to take, we talk about that lead time, but it's going to take time for him to build that team that he needs under him and get that Adrian Newey effect actually on the track. We were quite fortunate to get Rob Marshall from Red Bull as well. So he was a key figure there, and he's come along as a technical director for us now, and he's brought his experience of working with Adrian and working with Red Bull, through their most successful era to us, and some of that's translated, and helped us on our way to the championship last year. So I think Red Bull have a harder time of it, but I think to say that they're going to struggle now because he's gone, I think is not really fair to the strength of the team they've got there and the people who are still there.
And to that sort of point on lead time as well, it's fair to say that the Red Bull 2025 car was probably already locked and loaded well before he made that shift anyway. So people expecting Red Bull to fall off the grid at the start of the season, that's probably, if it happens, it's nothing to do with Adrian leaving.
Yeah, you'd expect that, certainly, that there's definitely elements of his signature in this year's car for sure, and some evidence of his legacy. So yeah, it's not a done deal that Aston will be at the top and Red Bull will be at the bottom now. It's not quite as simple as that.
Right, I realise for the last 10 minutes or so I've really been sort of pushing you outside your actual area of domain expertise, and I just appreciate sort of the general knowledge. Obviously you're a lot closer to Formula One than anyone else I get a chance to talk to, so couldn't pass up the opportunity to get some insight into that.
No problem at all. No, enjoy it.
All right. We'll move on outside of Formula One, and I know before we started talking on camera, or recording I should say, you were mentioning a project car that you're working on. You mentioned the lack of spare time, but interesting to me, one of the reasons we actually have you on the podcast is you're actually an HPA member, and I'd like to dig into that a little bit. It's refreshing for me that someone that's working in Formula One still finds value in HPA courses. So can you explain why you're a member?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing about the industry and Formula One is, it's fantastic engineering and it's the peak of motorsport, but it doesn't translate very well to the enthusiast level. So, when I come home and I want to work on my car, I'm not really applying much of what I've learned at work. And I did my motorsport course was great. Had some practical stuff, but primarily theoretical. I learned a lot about engine tuning, but from textbooks and doing maths and calculations. But actually, what was so appealing about HPA is how directly relatable it is to what I'm doing in the garage with the car, and specifically your courses on boost control and cam control were the first two I picked up because I want to tune those things on my car here, and I can see these worked case studies. It's you sat in a car on the dyno making cam angle adjustments and just seeing that live real time effect of those adjustments. And okay, it's great. I learned the theory about that when I was at uni. I don't go anywhere near that at McLaren because that's an engine side stuff, and that's looked after by Mercedes. Their system is obviously far removed from what I have on a road car. So it's just fantastic to go, okay, that's the effect this has, and this is Andre making these boost control changes, and okay, so now I understand that I'm on a Heltec ECU on my project car, so and that's something that you guys work with very closely as well. So it's just great to see the tools I've got being applied to directly relatable projects.
I think that there's like the two courses you just mentioned. One of the big parts that crosses over for both of those is tuning a PID control algorithm. And that's basically used in our ECUs anytime we've got a closed loop control system. So idle speed, drive-by-wire throttle targets, all of those use a PID control algorithm. So understanding, which is what we try and teach with both of those courses, how those elements interact and what they actually do. Because I remember back when I was sort of struggling and trying to figure this stuff out by myself, and you make a change to one of the gains and you don't really understand what it's doing, as opposed to understanding the effect of what changing the proportional, the integral and the derivative gains is going to do and how they interact with each other, and then developing a sort of a step-by-step process. We're going to do this, see how it responds, then we're going to add this. And when you've got that process to go through, all of a sudden it becomes relatively straightforward. I'm interested if you could just sort of break down this project car that you've got, this Heltec ECU running, because it's not the norm.
No, it's a bit unusual. I mean, as I touched upon, I built this classic Mini when I was much younger and enjoyed sort of engine swapping and tuning. And I ended up, when I was at GT, I was able to get hold of a scrapped 650 engine. So that 650 GT3.
A scrapped 650 GT3 engine just lying around, just getting in the way.
Yeah, it was from a crash damaged car that had actually caught fire. Not a serious accident, but unfortunate that the car was unfortunately unrecoverable, and we replaced it for the customer. The customer had a whole new car, and the engine was in a real state. The plastics were all melted. There's a lot of plastic on that engine. It looked, the wiring was destroyed. It was in the scrap metal bin, literally. It was, and that's where it looked like it should be. And I saw it and I thought, oh, that'd be a cool coffee table. I wouldn't mind making a coffee table out of that engine block. So I spoke to the owner and I said, look, what do you want to do with that engine? Do you want it? And he said, oh, no, I've got a whole new car, and also it's scrap. He knew it wasn't any good for a spare or anything. So I said, well, do you mind if I have it and turn it into an ornament? And he was like, yeah, absolutely, go, do what you like. So I forklifted it into the back of my van and took it home and chipped all the all the melted plastic off it and got the wiring off it. And then what I was left with was actually a pretty all right engine. It's probably less than 1,000 Ks on it, and actually they're detuned in a GT car, so it hadn't been pushed too hard in the scheme of things. Driven by a gentleman driver as well, so it had a good life as far as GT engine, race engine goes. So I ended up with this engine that looked okay, and it occurred to me that if I could replace the plastics and the sensors and things that were on it, I could actually maybe use this engine. I didn't have an ECU, I didn't have a gearbox, I just had a bare engine block, but it's not an incredibly complicated engine, twin variable cams and drive-by-wire throttle bodies, but otherwise it's not overly complex. So I was on eBay and I just trawled eBay for cam covers, and fortunately, certainly in America, there's a bit of a market for billet cam covers and intake manifolds, and people buy those. That means they've got the plastic ones available. The original ones they don't want anymore. No one really wants to buy them, so they end up cheap on eBay. Picked up all those bits, swapped it all out, ended up with a complete engine, and then thought, okay, what car can I put this in? And my brother and I are sort of involved in the project together, and we had a bit of a think about it, and we settled upon a 1988 Volkswagen Caddy, which was sold in the European market, and it was in America as a Volkswagen Rabbit, I think it was called there. I'm not sure if you had them down there, but it was it's like a small ute, a mini truck, really, a ute.
I had to Google it, and I'd recommend anyone who's not familiar with the Volkswagen Caddy does the same. And as soon as I saw what you're talking about here, I immediately questioned whether it needs 650 plus horsepower.
Well, of course, it doesn't need that much horsepower, but
does anyone really need 650 horsepower?
Yeah, I mean, we don't tune cars and play with them. We want as much horsepower as we can get, really, and we decided to put it in the back of that, or mid-engined as it was in the McLaren, and then we sort of started thinking, okay, well, what's the gearbox that we can run with that? So we started again. Honestly, this car's built almost entirely off eBay parts, and we ended up finding a Lamborghini Gallardo shared with the Audi R8. Actually, the gearbox in that one, the Graziano manual H pattern box. Again, a crashed car. Picked up a gearbox and designed a bell housing adapter and a flywheel adapter and fitted that to it. So we now had an engine and gearbox, that we could sit in the back of this car and basically built a sort of semi-space frame around it. We sort of settled on Porsche 911 rear suspension because of the sort of modularity of it and the multi-link, and then paired that with matching front suspension because we wanted to keep the sort of front and rear and try and build something that handled well. So we've ended up with a 1988 VW Caddy, but it's McLaren powered, Lamborghini gearbox, Porsche suspension, Porsche brakes, Heltec ECU, managing everything. It's the Nexus R5 we've gone for, so I've got the full VCU essentially. So none of the original wiring, no fuses, no relays, all the PDM features of it running the whole car. So it's a running, driving car now. It needs tuning. It's not yet road legal. That's a bit of a hurdle that we'll be approaching fairly soon. But no, it's a great project, and I
mean it sounds pretty wild. I'm interested for a start. Obviously, the rules and regulations on how to get something like that road legal just different in every part of the world. But what are the sort of the hurdles to road legality in the UK?
Yeah, I think actually in the UK we're quite fortunate. Certainly there are parts of Europe where it just people have seen this car, and I've got an Instagram for it and stuff, and people have seen it messaging me and gone, look, that's impossible to get legal in Germany or most parts of Europe. And actually it made me realise that we are quite fortunate in the UK in that we can do what's called an IVA, an individual vehicle assessment, and it's essentially what a kit car would go through. So you sort of like Caterham style Lotus 7esque or Cobra kit cars, any of those kits really have to go through this IVA, and it's a pretty strict. It takes a whole day. It's a guy with a clipboard and a huge checklist, and he's checking sharp edges and visibility and headlight position and safety aspects really. And ultimately, at the end of that, you get what's called a Q registration plate, and it's a plate that's prefixed with a letter Q, which is unique to vehicles that have gone through this specific test. And you can't put like a personalised registration plate on it. You can't put anything else on it. It has to live with that. People sort of turn their nose up at it a little bit. It's a bit of a shame to have that on it and not have in the UK, we have age-related plates. The plate on the car conveys the age of the car through a combination of letters and numbers and the sequence. And you can't have that. You have this Q plate. But because of the extent of the modifications on the car, it's really the only way of getting it totally above board and road legal. So it's a necessary evil to have to go through.
Small price to pay.
It's essentially a small price to pay, and it does just mean that it's squeaky clean above board, and certainly from the outside, apart from the wheel size and the wheel arches you had to put on it for the extra track width, it doesn't look far different from an original Volkswagen Caddy, to be honest with you. So with a cover over the bed on the back,
you never know. Yeah,
you never know. So there are sort of slightly less above board ways that I could have it on the road. But really the only way of being squeaky clean, and especially what we've invested time and effort and money into it, we do want to make sure that it's completely above board. So it's not the easiest process, but we've come to realise that actually in some countries it just wouldn't be even possible to consider it, these sorts of changes, such significant changes. So
yeah, and I think just sort of words of advice, I guess, as we're finishing this off, if you are, wherever you are in the world, if you are looking to build anything modified and you want to keep it street legal, the very first port of call would be finding out what your local legislation is, and then usually it's going to involve getting in touch with an engineer and basically running through the project. There's nothing worse than sort of finishing the project, then getting in touch with the engineer and finding out that you have to redo half of your hard work. That's really demoralizing. So yeah, having a good understanding of the process before you get started, definitely always the way.
Yeah, I mean, the IVA here in this country does have a sort of handbook that you can follow that kind of gives you that heads up before you get there. And then when you fail, for anything, if you fail, they do tell you, like, hey, you need to change this, or you need to sort of, it's down to things like, you've got to have all your wiring, clipped every 300 millimeters. There's got to be a clip on the wiring to secure it, things like that they're checking. So it's pretty
intense.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. But if you go by the book, it's straightforward. But yeah, certainly it's when you come to modify, it's definitely start by making sure you can get it legal. Otherwise, you're investing in something you're not going to be able to enjoy. So
yeah, no, fair enough. All right, Joel, I think we'll move towards wrapping this thing up, and we've got the same 3 questions we ask all of our guests at the end. The first of those is, what's next in the future for you? I guess we've kind of touched on a little bit of this, but are we going to become McLaren lifer?
Yeah, I'm always sort of testing the water really on sort of what's happening at McLaren and what's next and what opportunities might be in front of me. As I say, I'm still enjoying being trackside, so I'm going to carry on. But yeah, I think I'd say now I'm not going to be a trackside McLaren lifer. But if an opportunity came up that was factory based, managerial, but not necessarily required at the track for 24 races a year, I could certainly see myself going down that avenue before too long, really. So I think still at McLaren and maybe there for life, but not necessarily in this role and not necessarily trackside.
I guess from the outside looking in, one of the nice aspects of Formula One is that it's just such a vast range of jobs and skills that it does give you the flexibility of moving into a different role, still getting that sort of new topic that you can really sink your teeth into. So a lot of flexibility there, I would assume.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's so many roles, and what I find quite interesting is I talk to people and say I work for McLaren, I work in Formula One, and they go, oh, that must be a dream job, or it's a dream job to work for McLaren. It's like, well, there's so many jobs that it's hard. You can't just say, oh, working for McLaren F1 is my dream job. There's so much within that, and there's a lot of opportunities. So yeah, I'd be very hopeful that there'd be something else I can sort of move across into or develop into, and keep that enjoyment and that experience growing.
All right, our next question, is there any advice you'd give to a younger version of yourself to help reach where you are today in your career faster?
I think I touched on earlier, but I think really just going for those jobs that might just have, at the time felt like, oh no, I don't want to go sort of, 100 miles away or something. It's tricky because obviously the route I took got me to where I am now. So to say, actually, if I do something different, where would I have been? But I think the big one is just like the persevering and patience, but don't disregard things that actually might be good opportunities. Yes, okay, there's always going to be a little bit of sacrifice, I think, especially when you're trying to really focus on getting into a specific industry that's very competitive. I think you just have to have that preparation to sort of make sacrifices and.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as much sacrifice as maybe almost being prepared to live outside your comfort zone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's absolutely it. Yeah.
If you're living in a place and you're nice and comfortable there, you've got a friend group. It's not that appealing to shift to the other side of the country, or for that matter, the other side of the world. But sometimes taking that leap of faith is what's going to help you in the long run. It's always difficult, though, as you've sort of just mentioned. The path you've taken has got you where you are today. And if you'd done something different, what would that look like? Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball and we don't get to A/B test these decisions, so you just kind of make the most of the hand you've been dealt, which in your case is pretty good.
Yeah. I do sort of I pinch myself occasionally because I think I was lucky, but I look back, actually, I worked hard to get that luck, if that makes sense. I sort of had right place, right time, right person to speak to, but I really put myself out there to do that. So yeah, I think it's tricky to sort of look back and say, actually, what would I have done? Should I have stayed in Australia for a bit longer? I did enjoy it there, but then what route does that end up with me at? So,
I do think, as I sort of alluded to earlier, there's a limit to your progression in the motorsport industry on this side of the world, unfortunately, and that is just simply because everything high end is, well, most of it is happening in the UK. And then you've also, because you've got all the Formula One teams in relatively close proximity, you sort of get this whole sort of support industry of companies growing up in and around them. So everything you want and need is achievable there.
Yeah, and actually, certainly looking at it from the viewpoint of someone outside the UK, yeah, I'm very fortunate to have it all around me, really. And it's much harder to break into it from elsewhere in the world, but certainly not impossible. McLaren themselves, huge, multinational employer. We've got people from all over the world working with us, so it's testament that it is possible. But certainly, I think I had an advantage by already being right here in the thick of it.
Yeah. Okay, Joel, last question for today. If people want to follow you and see what you're up to, how are they best to do so? Got any social media accounts we can follow?
Well, yeah, I've got one for the car project. That's probably the if anyone's interested in that, it's at Garage 68 Motorsport. I sort of do, because of the nature of Formula One and the way that marketing and media, everything is so strictly controlled. Unfortunately, we can't really do much with personal Instagrams and sharing life inside F1. And I think it's a bit of a shame. When I do speak to people are very interested in what happens behind the scenes in Formula One, and it's just very difficult, certainly from personally, to share that. So it's fantastic to have a platform like this and chat about it. They do sort of not restrict us. That's a bit unfair what they're doing, but we have to understand that there's such commercial aspects at play that it limits what we can do with the sharing of the world of it. So, but certainly, if people are interested in the car that I'm building with my brother, then that's Garage 68 Motorsport. But yeah, otherwise, I'd just say keep an eye on the McLaren.
The official team social media.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a great team of social media. People there who look after all that, and I do feature on it every now and then. Doing a little piece to camera or a bit in the background and such. So I can get spotted, but it's best left to all the sort of pros for that.
Sure. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes anyway to make it easy for people to find. Look, Joel, great to chat today. As I said at the start, not often I get to talk to someone that's deep in the world of Formula One, so really great to get your insight. So thanks for your time, and we wish McLaren all the best for the 2025 season.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks very much. I've really enjoyed being on, and it's great to chat with you, having been involved in your seminars and courses and such. So yeah, thanks very much. I've enjoyed it, and hopefully we have a good year.
Yeah, no problem. All right, thanks. If you enjoyed this episode of Tuned In with Joel, we'd love it if you could drop a review on your chosen podcasting platform. These reviews really help us to grow our audience, and that in turn helps us to continue to get more high quality guests. To say thanks, each week we'll be picking a random reviewer and sending them out an HPA t-shirt free of charge anywhere in the world. This is also a great place to ask any questions you might have too, and I'll do my best to answer them if your review gets picked. So this week, a big shout out to Little Ones from Canada who has said, "Great listen. Have been listening to this podcast for ages now. Great to hear from experts on new topics and learn some new things." Well, it's great to hear that you are enjoying the podcast and picking up some new information. And if you reach out with your t-shirt size and your shipping details, we get a fresh tee shipped straight out to you. All right, that concludes our interview. And before we sign off, I just wanted to mention, for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis and race driver education. Now remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.